Just a few days before Christmas, my mom asked if my girlfriend and I could house sit and take care of her dogs while she went on a week-long vacation with her boyfriend. We agreed, and the first few days were pretty normal. My mom's house is on the edge of a small town in southern Ohio. It's usually quiet, and nothing much happens aside from occasional road work. It was about 3 nights into our stay when things got strange. My girlfriend and I were relaxing on the couch. She was busy on her phone, and I was playing Pokemon Sword on the Nintendo Switch. The clock had just hit midnight when we heard heavy footsteps coming from outside. It was eerie because it sounded like someone with big boots had walked up onto the porch. The layout of my mom's house is a bit unique. There's a couch against the wall with large windows on both sides, so we could both hear and partially see what was going on outside. The front porch is directly across from the couch. The person outside stomped heavily around the porch, making loud, unsettling sounds. Then he came really close to the window on our left and grunted, "Grrr," in this deep, angry voice. My girlfriend and I froze, unsure of what had just happened. We were in shock for a few seconds, but then quickly snapped out of it. We immediately turned off all the lights in the house and tiptoed into the laundry room, where we couldn't be seen from outside. After a while, I felt it might be safe to check if we could turn some lights back on. I peeked out of one of the windows and saw this large, burly guy shuffling down the sidewalk across from our house. It was midnight in a small, quiet town. Definitely not a place where things like this happen often. The only sound was his footsteps as he walked, carrying a plastic bag, which seemed odd since all the stores were closed at that hour. The guy kept shuffling strangely with the bag in his hand. Then suddenly, he started moving really fast in a strange way, crossing the street toward a parking lot near the house, and then he just vanished. I went back to the laundry room and told my girlfriend what I saw. We both went to check the windows to see if we could spot him again, but he was gone. My girlfriend looked out of another window on the opposite side of the house, and that's when she saw him again. This time, he was walking away. We were debating whether to call the cops when suddenly there was a knock on the door on the other side of the house. We rushed over and saw the doorknob jiggling like someone was trying to get in. Luckily, the door was locked. One of my mom's dogs, a small rescue pup, started barking like crazy with this high-pitched, screechy bark. I think the barking scared the person away. We called my mom for advice. We thought about calling the police, but around here, they aren't known for being very helpful, so we decided against it. My mom told us not to worry too much because it was probably just some drunk or high person who didn't know what they were doing. She said it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. I'm not sure what that guy's intentions were, and I'm really glad I didn't have to find out. This happened about 10 years ago when I was 14. At the time, I lived in an old farmhouse way out on a country road. The house was surrounded by cornfields, and our closest neighbors were 2 or 3 miles away. Living there was nice because not many people came by to bother us. One night, it was just my mom and me at home. We were baking treats to sell and raise money for my little brother's school group. My dad and brother were away helping my uncle with his farm animals. I remember we were busy in the kitchen, talking and laughing. Suddenly, we heard someone knock on the door. It was a regular, calm knock, like tap, tap, tap. Mom mumbled something to herself, took off her dish gloves, and went to answer the door. I felt a bit nervous, but I thought it was just my usual anxiety. As my mom approached the door, the knocking came again, but this time it had a weird rhythm. Tap, 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 almost like a pattern. Mom stopped in her tracks and turned back toward me. She looked pale and seemed unsettled. Instead of answering the door, she went to the window that faced the porch. She peeked out without pulling the curtain too much, so no one could see her from outside. Then she checked the driveway. I had stopped what I was doing because at that moment, baking pies didn't seem important anymore. My mom's eyes got wide when she saw outside, and she quickly closed the curtain. Her face was a mix of fear and anger. She grabbed my wrist and quietly asked if I had my phone. I nodded, and from the closet, she pulled out my dad's old baseball bat. Then we heard a loud bang on the door. I gasped as my mom grabbed my arm and whispered for me to stay quiet. We went to my parents' bedroom, where she locked the door and windows. She took my phone and started dialing a number while handing me the bat. She told me to sit on the floor, where I wouldn't be visible from the door. I watched as she opened the closet to get the gun case. I was really scared and couldn't focus on what she was saying on the phone. My mom was moving quickly now. She took out my dad's shotgun and loaded it, all while keeping her voice calm on the phone. When she hung up, she helped me up again, leading me quietly out of the room. We sneaked to the other side of the house, where the bathroom was. She handed me my phone and told me to go inside. Her face was serious as she said, "There are people outside, walking around the house. Stay in here and don't come out until I say it's safe." I nodded, shaking, and she squeezed my shoulders. After that, I heard her pushing something heavy, probably the chest we kept in the hallway, against the bathroom door. I sat on the floor, gripping the bat, and it felt like forever, but only a few minutes passed. Outside the window, I heard footsteps and hushed voices. One man said, "Are you sure anyone's home?" Another voice replied, "Yeah, I heard two people talking when we knocked." I held my breath, covering my mouth with a towel to keep quiet. I didn't know who these people were or what they wanted. Suddenly, another voice called out, "Let's go, someone saw the cops down the road." Then I heard them running away. After a few minutes, I heard my mom's voice through the door saying, "It's me. The sheriff's here. They're gone." I unlocked the door and opened it. The sheriff and my mom were there, moving the chest away. I ran to her, hugging her tightly. The sheriff told us his team was chasing the van that the men had come in, but they needed to ask us some questions first. As we sat in the kitchen, I learned what my mom saw when she looked out the window. The man at the door was wearing casual clothes, gym shorts, and a tank top. Not what you'd expect from a salesman or someone asking for help. When she looked out at the driveway, she saw a van parked in a way that blocked our car from leaving. Two men were in the van, and even though they were sitting still, the van rocked slightly, like more people were inside. As we talked, another officer came in, looking pale. He told the sheriff, "We caught up with the van. They swerved off the road and crashed into a ditch." The sheriff asked, "Are they hurt?" The deputy replied, "No, but we've got them in custody." There were 5 men inside. When asked what they were doing, the men claimed they were door-to-door salesmen. The sheriff didn't buy it. Later, they took my mom outside to explain what they found in the van. When she came back inside, she was holding me tight and crying. They had found rope, tape, burlap sacks, and sedatives. After hours of questioning, one of the men admitted they had been trying to kidnap someone, and since they had no luck in town, they drove out to rural areas looking for isolated homes. After that, my dad came home as fast as he could, and my uncle stayed with us that night just in case. My mom invested in home security and taught me and my brother how to load and shoot a gun. My aunt and uncle even gave us one of their German Shepherd puppies to train as a guard dog. Though, even with all that, my mom never really felt completely safe again. It took years before we could feel somewhat at ease. But every time I think back to that night, I still get chills. I used to live with my ex-boyfriend Dan in a small apartment in Montreal. Our relationship wasn't great. It was full of problems and sometimes got heated. I was also sick and couldn't go out much, so I spent a lot of time online. I didn't have many friends left, as most of them drifted away when I got sick. One day, after a big fight with Dan, I was feeling really sad and lonely. To distract myself, I started chatting with random people on a website. That's when I met a guy named John who shared the same hobbies as me. We both loved playing video games, and we ended up chatting almost every day for about 6 months. John knew I was in a bad relationship, even though I didn't share every detail. One weekend we decided to meet up, and he was fine with coming to my place. At first, we were both shy, but after a few drinks, we started chatting and laughing, and I felt happy to finally have someone to talk to. After that, we met at least once a week, and it was a really good time for me. We had a lot in common, and John never pushed me to go out when I didn't want to. He was also dealing with depression and felt like his life was falling apart, so I tried to be there for him. I just wanted him to feel better and enjoy hanging out with a friend. On my 22nd birthday, Dan decided to throw a party and invited John. He was the only friend I had nearby, but Dan also invited 10 of his own friends, which made me uncomfortable because I get anxious around too many people. I spent most of the night cooking and serving Dan's friends instead of enjoying the party. To make it worse, Dan embarrassed me in front of everyone. John noticed how upset I was and came over to comfort me. I shared how badly Dan had been treating me. I told John I loved Dan but planned to break up with him when it felt safe. While I was crying, John tried to kiss me, but I stopped him. My life was already complicated, and I didn't want to add more problems. It felt strange, like a betrayal, because I thought we were just friends. He didn't say anything after that, but he did leave me a beautiful necklace as a birthday gift before he left. I felt awkward accepting such an expensive gift, but he left without a word. After that, I felt it was best to put some space between us. I told John that if he wanted something more than friendship, it couldn't be with me. A few months later, he sent me a ton of messages, like 20 in one night. He said he was really in love with me and wanted to save me from my situation, claiming I was the only reason he kept going. Meanwhile, Dan started getting angry because I was receiving too many texts and calls from John. It made me anxious, so I turned off my phone and focused on my job at the time, working as a waitress in a small cafe. One night while I was at work, the phone rang. and when I answered, I heard someone breathing on the other end. I recognized the voice. It was John. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I quickly hung up, but the phone kept ringing, maybe 10 more times, until my boss answered. It was around 7 p.m., and I was supposed to finish my shift at midnight. At 11 p.m., John showed up at my workplace, begging to talk to me. I was terrified and ran to the back to tell my coworker what was happening. My coworker took over my role, and I stayed in the kitchen until John finally left. I was too scared to go home alone, so my coworker gave me a ride back to my apartment. The next day, I woke up to over 100 missed calls from a blocked number. I was exhausted and tried my best to ignore him, but a month passed and he kept showing up at my workplace. I hoped he'd understand and leave me alone, but it only got worse. I even tried going to the police, but they dismissed it, saying it was just a guy in love and not a big deal. One day, while I was at home, Dan got a message. It was from John. He had sent Dan a long text, claiming we'd been together intimately and that I was a cheater. I was in shock and didn't know how to react. Thankfully, Dan had already suspected John was bothering me, even though I hadn't told him everything. Dan blocked John and went to work. That day, I was supposed to start my shift a little later, so I was home alone. For some reason, I felt like something bad was going to happen. My heart was racing, and I felt sick. Then the doorbell rang. It rang again, and again, 10 times, but I couldn't move. My whole body was frozen. I didn't want to open the door, so I just waited. A few hours later, I finally got the courage to leave for work. When I opened the door, there he was, John. He was crying. I didn't feel scared at that moment, just desperate to leave. As I tried to walk down the stairs, he grabbed my arm. I hit him and begged him to let me go. All I wanted was to run away. He pushed me against the door and said, "If you don't talk to me, I'll go to Dan's work and tell him everything. Or maybe I'll hurt myself. It doesn't matter anymore." I felt trapped. I didn't want to call the cops because they hadn't helped me before. So I agreed to talk to him after my shift. Surprisingly, he calmed down and left. At work, I told my coworker and boss everything. My coworker decided to wait outside in his car after my shift, just in case. When I finished work, John was there. We sat outside and talked. He repeated the same things he'd been saying for months, and I finally interrupted. I told him, calmly but firmly, that nothing would ever happen between us and that he was making my life miserable. He seemed to realize what he had been doing. He then handed me a large package filled with expensive things. I didn't want to accept it, but he insisted. He said if I took it, he wouldn't contact me again. I was exhausted and just wanted to be done with the situation, so I agreed. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. 2 weeks later, while staying at a friend's place, I woke up at 5 a.m. to my phone ringing. I was too tired to answer, but it kept ringing. It was texts from an unknown number. I opened the first message, and it was a picture of blood. Then more pictures started coming. There were over 30 images of mutilated arms, legs, and torsos. In the last picture, I saw John's face. I showed my friend, and we both panicked. Then I got a video from him. He was in a hospital bed, trying to talk, though it was hard to understand. All I could make out were words like love and promise. He had tried to hurt himself. Later, I found out that he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and a personality disorder. He stayed in a psychiatric clinic for a few months. Since that day, I've moved to a new city, started a new job, and I'm now with a new boyfriend. Even though it still haunts me, I try to move forward. I don't think John is a bad person. He just needed help.